What's up, guys? This is the Intro to CG class at Real Life Ministries Post Falls, Week 1, Summer 2022. All right, so this first lesson is just getting used to the Maya interface, how to navigate it, how to create some simple shapes, and build some basic objects. So let's get started. You'll notice my screen has like a light blue kind of gradient to it. I just changed the color of that just to make it easier for you guys to see in the video. Yours will be gray, so don't worry too much about that for right now. So the first thing we're going to want to do is use the different hotkeys on the keyboard to kind of move around. This is called the viewport. This is like the 3D world that we're going to operate in. So if I hold down the Alt key on the keyboard at the same time I click with my left mouse button, we could tumble around this viewport. And if I keep holding down the Alt key and click with the middle mouse, we could pan. So we're using that middle mouse wheel as like a button, and I'm holding down Alt and I'm clicking and holding down that middle mouse button, and I could pan up, down, left, right, all that stuff. And the middle mouse wheel will just zoom in and out. So to repeat those, that's the Alt key on the keyboard with the left mouse button allows you to kind of tumble the viewport. The Alt key and the middle mouse button allows you to pan, and the mouse wheel allows you to zoom in and out. All right, so let's create some basic primitive shapes. So we're going to work with something called polygonal geometry, and polygons are what make up like if you're playing video games and you see like the 3D meshes, those are made up of polygons. There's different types of geometry in Maya. If I go to this create menu at the top left, there's NURBS primitives, which we're probably not going to use too much of. They're kind of old school. And then we have polygon primitives, and that's what we're going to use. So if you want to just kind of start messing around, you could like go over here where it says sphere, and I click that, a little sphere appears. And again, if I want to zoom in on it, I use my mouse wheel to get closer. And if I'm like, oh, I want to kind of move my camera over, because we're kind of looking through a camera, and hold down the Alt key, middle mouse button to pan, and Alt key, left mouse button to tumble. Cool, so now let's create a cube. So I'll go back up to create, and we'll go to polygon primitives, and we'll go to cube. But it's like, well, where is it at? It's actually inside the sphere. This is something I didn't show in the class, but there are some hotkeys. You can hit the 4 key on the keyboard to see wireframe, and the 5 key goes back to shaded. So wireframe is 4, 5 is shaded mode. So you can see that there's this cube buried inside of my sphere. Now if I click off, I'm like, how do I get that back? I could click on the sphere. Now there's this move tool over here on the left. I could click this. On the left side there's this toolbar. Click that. Now I have this move manipulator, and I can move it in these 3 different axes. We have Z is blue, X is red, Y is green, and up and down. Now you can move, if I just want to kind of move it just in any direction, if you click in the very middle of these 3 axes, you could kind of just move it, and it's moving in relation to the camera we're looking through. Let me go back to shaded mode. But since I moved that off now, we can see our cube is here, and I could click the cube and move it as well. And we have some other tools here. We have a rotate tool. So if I click this rotate tool, we could kind of start rotating these objects. And we have a scale tool, which allows us to kind of to scale these up. Now we're not actually zooming our camera, we're actually scaling up this cube in relation to the world. So you can see this grid at the ground is staying the same, whereas if I were to zoom the camera in and out, the grid changes as well as the shapes. So there's some hotkeys to get these tools. Instead of going over here and clicking every time, like the arrow key, the move. So the arrow key the arrow tool just allows you to kind of pick things. Oops, I somehow got into component mode, which allows you to select the points that make up the polygons, but I don't want that right now. So if that happens to you, just right click and go to object mode. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But if that's something that happens, just right click and go to object mode, and you could select the whole object again. And if you notice when I'm moving these things around, oh yeah, the hotkeys, right, for the different tools. So on your keyboard, we have Q. So Q, W, E, R, the first 4 letters on the keyboard represent these tools here, the arrow, move, rotate, and scale. So right now I'm on the arrow tool, so I can just select things. If you select something, you could delete it by hitting delete. You could hit the Z key on the keyboard to undo, and you can undo as many times as you want. But if I want my move tool now, I can just hit W, and you can see over on the left, it's switched to the move tool. So now I can move this stuff around. And if I want to rotate, I hit the E key. Now I got my rotate tool. So it allows you to kind of start working a lot faster by just kind of, oh, I want to move this. Oh, I want to rotate this guy. Hit the E key. Go back to the move tool, hit W. Oh, I want to scale it. I hit R. And you could scale in, one direction or all directions at once by clicking the middle. So this is kind of like a quick introduction how to manipulate these shapes, and we'll kind of build something like simple out of some simple shapes. One thing we didn't go over in the class is construction history, and we talked about moving components around a little bit. So let's go over those 2 things first. So I'm just going to select all this stuff. They kind of get highlighted, and I just hit delete so we can start kind of from fresh. And I'm going to pick something like, go to create polygon primitives, and I think a helix would be a good primitive to start with. So it's kind of like a spring. If you think of like a DNA helix as like 2 helices or however you call it. But it's kind of thick, and it looks kind of like has these hard edges on it, and I don't like the way that looks. So let's say you want to change that. So over on the very right, sorry, get this little message here. It's not going away. All right, we'll have to ignore that. On the very right, this area here is called the channel box. If this goes away, sometimes there's these little tabs that might get clicked. Just click back on where it says channel box, layer editor on the right, super far right of the screen, and you'll get that back. But over here where it says inputs, so if I have nothing selected, there's nothing here. I have to actually click on this helix or draw a box around it, and then I see where it says this poly helix 1. If I click that, we have all these options. So right now there's 3 coils. I could type in another number like 5 and get more coils. I could change the height from 2 to like 5 as well. Now it's stretched it out. The width, let's change it to like 3. I'm just picking random numbers here. Radius, it's 0.4. Let's make it skinnier, so like 0.2. Enter. Now here's where we could change with how this looks. Right now it's kind of faceted. We can select each little face, and we want to increase the resolution of this. We want to increase the number of polygons that make up this helix or this spring, whatever you want to call it. So we have subdivisions around the axis. So we have 8 subdivisions. So let's crank that up to like 20. And you'll see now we have more lines making up this spring, so it looks a little bit more rounded. And I think the other subdivisions are probably fine, but if I crank that up to like 100, the coil subdivisions, you can see it just cranks up the resolution of the shape. So like, it depends how close the camera is going to get to an object, how dense you want the mesh to be. But let's say you're getting kind of close up on it. If I click off of that, oops, I'm going to undo. I just clicked something by accident. If I click off of it, it looks pretty smooth and it looks pretty good. So that's one way to edit these things. So like if I do something different, like create polygon primitives, a cone, and then let's grab the move tool, which is W, and I move that over to the side. I could, again, with that cone selected, if I select two things at once, usually the last thing you have selected will be the option here. So you could click on this polycone and change the height. Oh, another thing is you could click on these words here, like subdivision axis, and you could middle mouse click and drag in the viewport, and it actually adjusts those numbers. You can see the numbers changing here as I middle mouse and click and drag. So that's another way, and then subdivisions along the height. That's another way you could edit those things. All right, and so the last thing about editing the shape of something, let's make a cube. Polygon primitives, cube, and I'll grab my move tool, which is W, and just kind of move it over here so I can see it better. If I go to the construction history on that, and it's called construction history because this is the information that Maya uses to construct these objects. So it's like it keeps like a history of the inputs that make these objects. So again, over in the right side of the screen here in the channel box, I have to have, if I don't have this selected, there's nothing here. If I click, if I drag a box and select that cube, now I could click on that word polycube right here, and now I could change the subdivisions on the width. If I want to type in a specific number like 4, enter, so I can see now I have more subdivisions in this direction. And then if I do the same thing here, so along the height, and if I just want to go ahead and make them all 4, whatever, like that's fine. So let's say we're like, oh, this is cool, but I want this to be a slightly different shape. So we can actually select this, right click on it, and if we go to vertex, now we get these little purple dots show up, and we can actually select each individual dot and move them and actually start changing the actual shape of this thing. Now there's other ways we could do this too. We could right click on it and go to edge. And what an edge does is it pretty much is like selecting 2 vertices at the same time, but you're clicking on the little line that's between the vertices, and you can move those. You could scale them. You could rotate them. E for rotate. So you have all these options for moving these things around. And if I want to click on an actual polygon, and these are called faces, each little facet is a face. If I right click and go to face, now I click on that and the whole thing kind of turns green or orange, and then you can hit like W and you can move it. You could hit E to rotate it, R to scale it, all this kind of thing. Another cool thing here, and I'm showing you guys a lot of stuff in a short amount of time, so feel free to pause the video, rewind the video, go in slow motion, however is best for you to learn this. If you have like a face or even a vertex, if I go back, right click and go back to vertex mode, click on a vertex. If I want to like kind of move this corner out, but I want like a fall off to affect the other vertices, if I undo that, if I tap the B key on the keyboard, now we have something called soft selection, but this is kind of the fall off is too big. It's like affecting the whole cube. So if I hold down the B key now and middle mouse click and drag, we get this like circle that represents the effect that selection is going to have on the cube. So let's say we'll leave it at that. Now if I move this vertice, it kind of like softly moves everything else with it, and you get more of like an organic shape kind of happening with this. So again, if I want to turn that off, I just tap the B key. Now I'm just moving one vertex at a time. If I want to turn it back on, you tap the B key again, and that'll do that. And again, if you want to adjust the fall off, you hold down the B key and middle mouse drag, and you could adjust the fall off with how big of an effect that selection is going to have. Now to go back to object mode again, you just right click and go to object mode. So now there's no soft select in object mode because we're just moving objects around. So I made this weird little meteorite meatball looking thing here. All right, so let's actually like make like a little robot or something with the skills we've just learned, right? So I'm just gonna select all this stuff and just hit delete. So I'm gonna go to create. I'm gonna work kind of fast here, but again, feel free to slow down the video if you need to. There's controls on YouTube on how to do that. All right, so I'm gonna go to polygon primitives, and let's make a cylinder for like a head. Thinking like Tin Man kind of robot head or whatever. I'm just gonna grab my move tool, which is W, and just kind of move it up in space a little bit. And let's grab like a polygon cube. So let's go to create, polygon primitives, oops, cube. And let's change, let's add some more subdivisions here. So let's go back. I like that. I'm going to click on where it says polycube. And I'm going to, where it says subdivisions width, height, and depth, I'm just going to kind of highlight all of those and type in 4. So now we get 4 subdivisions in each direction. And I'm going to maybe scale up this thing. So I'm going to hit the R key, get my scale tool and kind of scale it up. But, maybe it's too fat front to back. So I want to, and actually front to back is the Z direction. So I'm going to go to the blue one here and kind of squash it in. And this is the scale tool. And you get the scale tool by hitting the R key, if you weren't sure how I did that. So move is W, E is rotate, R is scale. So we'll scale that in a little bit. And maybe I want to like have him have like a little smaller waist or something. So I'm going to right click on it and go to vertex. And I'm going to just draw a box in like the lower half of this guy and select these lower vertices. And looks like I have soft select turned on. I'm going to turn that off, but I'm going to tap the B key on my keyboard and scale that in a little bit. So, yeah, I mean, it's nothing super fancy, but now I want to go back to object mode because I'm done editing the vertices of this guy. And I'm going to right click and go to object mode. And I want to move up. So I hit W, move up this thing, torso, whatever you want to call it. Let's make like a thigh kind of robot. Let's see, like a leg. So let's create a cube, polygon primitives, cube. And I'm just going to kind of move this to the side with my move tool. Again, that's W. And let's hit R to scale it. Let's make it like a little bit taller. Kind of squish it in a little bit. And yeah, let's rotate it. So we can rotate it like this. And if we scale it, maybe we want to make it thicker in this direction. That's the R key to scale it. And E is to rotate. And W is the move tool, and we can move that kind of closer back into a side, maybe move it down a little bit, and I don't know, it's not very proportional, but scale it down a little bit. So you can see with the hotkeys, I'm just kind of quickly moving, scaling, moving, rotating, and yeah, this is not going to be a very pretty looking robot, but yeah, feel free to use your creative freedom. I'm just kind of trying to move through this pretty quickly. Another cool thing is you could duplicate stuff. So like, let's say I already have this cube in the shape I kind of like. Let's go ahead and copy it. So in other programs you do copy and paste, and Maya you really don't. You do duplicate. So you would hold down Control and then hit D. So Control D duplicates it, and it's in the exact same spot. So it looks like if I click off of it, it looks like, oh, there's just one thigh joint or whatever you want to call this piece. But if I click it and move it, you'll see there's actually 2. So now we can rotate this one. If I hit the E key to get my rotate tool and kind of, let's make this like, I don't know. I'm just kind of fudging this thing here a little bit. Right. And let's, I don't know, make this, I'm thinking more of like a dinosaur leg kind of thing set up where like maybe there's like this extra joint at the bottom, so maybe I'll duplicate this hit E to rotate the duplicate, and you can see there's that copy right there. And hit the scale tool to scale this down. And let's move it down. W is the move tool. And duplicate it again. And boom, we got this foot on. I hit E to rotate, W to move. And yeah, we're just kind of like, I don't know, it's not that great, but it's just a quick little lesson. And take your time. You could throw eyes on your guy. You could like create a polygon sphere and move it up and kind of scale it down with the R. Hit R to get the scale tool, and you could maybe smash it like along the one axis there, and then hit W to move it, and just kind of it sinks into the head, but then you move it forward and it pops out. So like maybe this guy is like a one eye or something. I don't know. But let's say we created this leg and we're like, oh, this is awesome, but I want to kind of move it over to the other side. Let's talk about groups for a second. So if I select all this stuff, I could easily hit Control D to duplicate it and then move it. But then if we go to rotate it, we're going to see some weird effects like this. They're all kind of rotating from their own pivot point. So I'm going to undo that and undo the duplicate. On the left side of the screen, there's this list of things that are in our scene, in our world. This is called the outliner, and you can see it says outliner right there. So I have these objects. I have a cylinder, and you can select them up here too. I have this, I have my leg and all that stuff. You can actually double click these and rename them. So like this cylinder, I could double click this and call it head, enter. Double click this, call it like torso, enter. It's good to name the parts of your stuff. So like this would be like the left. I'll do underscore thigh or hip. Let's do hip. Left hip. This will be, so I'm double clicking these, left underscore knee. And this would be left underscore ankle. And this would be left underscore like foot, let's say. Left foot. And this would be the eye. And I'm going to go ahead and save this scene because I've done a lot of work and I don't, Maya crashes, the computer crashes. You don't want to lose your work. So go up to File, Save Scene As. If you have a thumb drive, you can save it there. I'm just going to save mine. I have an Intro to CG folder on my computer. I'm going to call this like primitive robot. Oops. I like using, and I can't type today, I like using underscores. What's up with this? Primitive robot. I like using underscores to separate stuff, like so you get space in the name. It's just something that people tend to do in the industry. So let's hit Save As. And okay, cool. So now let's say we want to copy this like left leg. The best way to do that would be to kind of select the box around all the parts of it. So we got left hip, left knee, left ankle, left foot, all that stuff. And if we hit Control G, it puts it into a group. So if I undo that, if you look over in the outliner, I have all these things selected. But if I hit Control G in the outliner here, it makes a group. And a group is like an invisible object that now is like the boss of these little tiny pieces. So it's almost like a folder. So it's almost like we stuck these in a folder, but that folder has like a 3D pivot point in space. So if I can't see it in the viewport, but in the outliner I could see it. It says group 1, and if I click on it, it selects it, and I can move that leg from that pivot point now, which is at the origin. And that all moves together. So what we could do is just duplicate our group 1. So I can't select my group 1 in the viewport. I have to go in the outliner here and select it. So if I click it here, it's selected, and if I do Control D to duplicate it, now I have group 2, and if I hit this little plus sign next to it, we can see it it kept the left side naming, but now if we hit the move tool, and I can move this over here, and we got like this other side. And if I wanted to change these names, there's actually a quick way to do that. If I select group 2 in the outliner and then go up to modify, and under here in the middle, there's a search and replace name. So I can click that, and if I search for left and replace it with right, I could hit apply, and it fixes all these names for me. That's pretty cool. So yeah, so we made our little robot guy. There's no arms or anything, but yeah, you can take your time, play around with creating primitive shapes, changing their construction history. Again, if I click on this polycube here, and I could change the height and subdivisions, all that stuff. You can see it changing right there. Now on these duplicates, when you duplicate stuff, it doesn't retain that construction history. So if you want to edit that stuff, you're going to want to do it like I could delete this group too. And if I want to go back in here and edit that stuff on these, I could, and then just duplicate that group again to make the other leg. Yeah, so just navigating the main takeaways are, navigating the viewport, Alt, left mouse button tumbles, Alt, middle mouse click pans, middle mouse wheel zooms. We have our QWER key. So Q gets just the select tool. We could pick objects. We can't really move them or do anything with that tool. W is the move tool. E is the rotate tool. R is the scale tool. If you want to move specific points on a mesh or 3D object, people call them meshes. They call them models. Geo for geometry. You could click on something and right click on it and go to vertex. Click on a vertex, hit the move tool, which is W, and move it. If I undo that and then tap which is Z to undo, tap the B key to get that like soft fall off. And again, if you hold down B in middle mouse drag, you could adjust that fall off, and you could, kind of a little bit more organically start to shape stuff. Right click, go back to object mode, and now we can move that object around. You could double click things and rename them in the outliner here. Head, torso. It's good to name things. I'll name this like left leg group. Stuff like that. It's good to name things so they make sense. File save and Control S are the same thing. So if I hit Control S now, it'll save my scene. So if Maya crashes, I won't lose any work. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So the main goal is to just kind of mess around and kind of create something with some primitive shapes. Feel free to explore and create. Go to Polygon, create Polygon primitives, and just mess with all these different things and see what they do. There's some pretty weird stuff that is a little bit new that I've never really messed with, but we'll get into some more advanced modeling techniques in the next class. All right, guys, see you then.